There we go. It looks like we're live now.
We are live.
Hey, so here we are with the third Community Amnesia Fortnite mentor stream. With me, we have Camden Stoddard. Would you like to introduce yourself and explain some of the things that you do at Double Fine?
Sure. Hi, Camden Stoddard. I'm the studio sound.
With me, we have Camden Stoddard. Would you like to introduce yourself and explain some of the things that you do? Is there a chance you've... No?
Camden Stoddard. I'm the studio.
There we go.
Okay, sorry. We had audio things going. Thanks, dude.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, hi guys. So I'm the studio sound supervisor and basically in charge of everything sound. So dialogue, music, sound effects, everything that you hear in the game. It's my job to make sure it's working and getting in properly.
Awesome. So what do you feel is the most important thing you've learned from doing Amnesia Fortnights or any other game jams or similar sorts of activities?
I've learned about stress management. I'm going through that right now. There are 4 really, really crazy prototypes in the works, and there's just tons and tons of audio problems. We're not hearing stuff. Things aren't being imported correctly. So right now I've learned that that's okay. That'll come in time, and you can't freak out or everything will just go really, really badly.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky proposition because of the situation you're in. You're likely to be allocated to a bunch of different teams. Like you're likely to be helping out with a whole bunch of different stuff. Excuse me. And the other thing I was going to ask before we kind of start looking at the contributions that people have provided over the past couple of days is what do you hope to learn personally out of this Amnesia Fortnight?
Really want to learn about the limitations and everything you can do with our new middleware Wise and with UE4. This is the first time we've really done it with UE4. So we have a whole bunch of new software, plus we have a whole bunch of new people. So I'm kind of curious about how they'll do under stress, how they'll communicate, just kind of where all the cracks are, how I'll do with them. There's a lot of new things around people, software, relationships that are going to come out of this. You know, we're going to see everything because AF, that's what AF does. It's a cauldron. Or rather a crucible, you put everything in and it burns it down to its essence because it's a boiler of pressure for a while.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're gonna have a quick listen to a couple of music tracks that people have contributed. You won't be able to hear me while we're doing these, so I'll introduce them ahead of time. The first one is from Light Soda, and it's the music that we put together for the pitch video. The second one is from Kyle Wynn, and it's a piece of music aimed at potentially fitting a space-themed table. And then the third piece is another one from Light Soda that he's currently working on at the moment. So let's switch across and have a listen to that.
I like these.
So yeah, we've got a few bits and pieces there. It's without having them in the game, it's hard to know how everything's going to kind of come together. But I think we've got some there's some cool spaces that we're exploring there. You got any thoughts from your perspective on how these could be improved, or any feedback for the contributors on their work?
I like it. I'm not sure if there's something going on with the stream because I'm hearing differences in tempo a lot, and it seems to go in and out of resolution. But I heard enough to be able to tell like what's going on, and I'm liking it a lot. It's feeling very good. It's like kind of all of them actually had this like really great exploration feel, lots of energy, all tinged with 80s and cool synth.
Yeah.
I'm loving all the drum work. Very fun.
Yeah, it's cool.
I could do a lot with that music. It's good stuff.
So we might also very quickly. I won't linger on them too long because I don't want to get too bogged down in it. But I might have a quick play of some of the sound effects that I'm not even going to try and say their name. We're just going to call them STR for now. Has been working on, and these have been contributed up to the asset sources repository. They're not quite in the game yet, but I think they're a good base for us to start from. So I'll switch across and we can have a listen to those. All right, sorry about that. We had a slight problem there where I lost control of my computer for a moment. But yeah, I
wanted to get on something now. Do you want me to go into detail about what I would do with that music, or any kind of suggestions of where I would go with it, or the sound effects, or what would you like?
Yeah, I think if you've got feedback, then this is a good venue to offer it. So yeah, if you've got anything to share it.
Okay, so the first thing with the music, I would break everything into stems. One of the things that I did on Headlander, like there's some really juicy instrumentation going on in the music. So all the synths, all the drums, everything, I would bounce those out into separate tracks as much as possible, and I would do different processing on each track. So like I would have I don't know, 8 or 9 different versions of the drums. So like you'd have them dry, you would have them with reverb, you would have like a phase pass, like flanging, like so they're really space agey. I would get as much variations in the actual tones of the instrumentation as much as possible. And then when I'm implementing it, depending on game state or whatever, I would try and do a parameter where you switch all of those out. Okay, so like as you go into this certain part, all of a sudden the drums become super flangy. Okay, and like do that. So like the characteristics that I'm hearing in space age 80s, like kind of old school drums and synths, I would amp that up as much as possible and have like 5 or 6 different versions that I could fade in and out of.
Okay, so when we're going through ramps, for example, maybe we like ramp up a bunch of the percussion, or when we're hitting bumpers, we change things a little bit. Mm-hmm. When things bounce off paddles, we sort of use those as cues for adjusting the balance of the aspects of the music. That's the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yes, and I would probably, I'm not listening on great speakers, but I would probably do a couple versions where I really, really compress hard. One thing that I've learned, if I really want strong sounding music, is I'll have what I call compression elements, where, but I don't know how much people here are working in terms of like if they're doing Pro Tools or if they're doing Audacity or they're doing Logic or whatever. But I would have like almost like a parallel compression setup. So you have that music track, but then in certain moments when there's a lot of tension, you bring in this compression element. So like all of a sudden everything just beefs up super hard. So I would play to the tonality and the character of that song's instrumentation. And like when you're writing a song, the actual tones and mixing changes depending on what's going on with the game.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So we might jump across to some questions now. I'll let people have a bit of warning on that. And while we wait for those to come in, I was going to ask, as far as working on sort of fast development and small prototypes and stuff, do you have any strategies for maximizing your efficiency? Do you lean on existing audio libraries, or do you work in particular ways to create new stuff?
Are you asking if I have like templates that I draw from, stuff like that? With AF, not really, because I don't really know what people are going to be throwing at me. So I hate to say it, but typically during Amnesia Fortnite, I start from scratch. And I have lots of sound libraries and stuff that I can draw upon, but I don't really know what it's going to be, what the actual sound of each project's going to be, probably until like a good 4 or 5 days into Amnesia Fortnite. Like right now, just going through and meeting with each team and seeing what they're drawing out, like they don't even know what the game's going to be like. So I'll just kind of write things down, like just in terms of tones. Like Osip's game is a crazy game where you're feeding the gods and all this, and it's this giant amphitheater, and there's like a Japanese cooking show vibe, but like it's just constantly changing. So like I'm kind of starting from scratch. Like I'm like, okay, so what would food that's like 200 pounds sound like when you move it, right? What would the sound of the god's voice sound like? So I just start doing little experiments like that. Like I took one of the team members and I put her in a vocal booth, and I started doing processing on her voice to make her sound huge and godlike, just to see like how big it can get. Let's see, Darwin's Dinner is now design-wise, it's kind of going all over the place. It's kind of another planet now, which is interesting. So I just started doing like making up different kinds of creature sounds and starting to sketch like ambience. You know, what would be otherworldly if you were on another planet? What would the surroundings, if you just stood still, sound like? So we just start sculpting from there, and then as they start designing and bringing in new ideas, then we kind of whittle it down to where their direction's going. But I mean, you're kind of making everything at the same time they are.
Right. So moving on to some of the questions from the communities, the person that we were calling STR earlier asks, is it worthwhile to try and keep sound effects in tune with music, or does that increase the scope horribly?
In what with music?
In tune or in the same key, yes, to harmonize the music?
Yeah, in the same key, yeah, absolutely. It also works to keep it out of key as well, depending on the situation in the game. That was all throughout Headlander. Dave Earl was throwing so much music at me. We had to be really kind of in tune with each other around chords and how he was doing stuff, because a lot of the sound design was like engines and big mechanical stuff, and which has a tonal element. So I had to make sure it wasn't gonna just totally bump up against what he was doing musically. Right. But then there were other times where we wanted to create tension, so I went against the key of his stuff on purpose, so that it created this dissonance and you felt uneasy. So it's super important. I actually think the relationship between sound effects and music is very, very important, and you should absolutely know, what modes you're in, what chords are going on, so that you can manipulate that in your sound design work.
Yeah, totally. So hang on, I've got I'm hearing myself a little bit. Is there a chance that you've got a pair of headphones that are accessible nearby?
I'm in Greg's office. I'm looking.
Yeah, I know. Actually, it seems to have stopped now. I think we're good.
Okay. Yeah, he doesn't have any.
I was hearing myself echo back like almost in real time. I'm like, that's not so good.
I'm seeing questions up on live chat too. Did you want me to answer these?
Yeah, I'm getting someone to actually copy and paste those across. So these are what I'm asking at the moment. So the same person asks again, I'm curious about the generic journey through production pipeline of recorded and or synthesized sound when it is normalized, if filtering and effects are applied mostly in editing or real time in the game engine. Maybe if you have any miscellaneous tips on that front. Yeah, that's a bit of a handful. Do we want to try and break that down to a few different things, or are we good?
It depends on the game, of course, but yes, typically, right. So my workflow would be for synthesized stuff. I do it in Pro Tools. I'm a Pro Tools guy, so I would create most of my synth work in Pro Tools. I would probably also edit it from there. I would keep it very, very uncompressed because the more work you do in the implementation flow, the more compression is going on. Like you never, that's a big one. You never know what your sound's going to sound like until it's in game. Don't bank on, oh, it sounds like this in Audacity, so that's how it sounds. It won't when it's in game, because when it's finally in game, the game will be compressing it as well. So I tend to leave a lot of headroom, at least 10 to 12 dB when I'm first creating content, and then as I go further, like editing, normalizing. Normalization I don't really do for sound design that often. I do it a lot on dialogue, but on sound design, I really like dynamic control on sound design as much as possible. A lot of people I know do normalization in sound design. I don't know. I'm a stickler for that. So I like going into the game and individually tweaking, which is a pain in the ass because there's usually thousands of files. But that's me. But yeah, I would leave yourself a lot of headroom. Try not to do as much compression as you can throughout the process, unless you want it over compressed. Again, it depends on the game. Maybe that is the thing you're going for. Like, man, when it's finally in PS4, I hope it's compressed to shit, man. This is gonna be awesome. Like, then it's great. And who knows with video games, because like it can be anything.
So do you have any?
I don't know if I'm getting technical enough. I'm trying to.
No, it's cool. I think this is good stuff. I was going to ask if you had any perspectives. This is from Light Soda, asking if you have any perspectives on writing music for games versus writing music for as just sort of singular performance pieces. And do you have any thoughts on how they might be approached differently?
Yes. So, yes, I have a lot of respect for people who are actually really great video game composers. I'm not a great composer. I compose. I do know, though, having talked to some great composers, that video games are entirely different because you're not in a locked situation. You're not. You don't have like a beginning, middle, end typically, and that's like when you're doing an album or you're doing a performance or you're doing movies. That's the flavor your music has. Like where it's going to be beginning, middle, and end, right? It has that behavior. In games, it's a whole different show because you have game states, you may replay an area, you may do all kinds of stuff, so the composer actually has to think about that. Like, really great video game composers think about replays. Like, we did that on Headlander. There's actually music you hear in Headlander for the first time when you're replaying, when you go back after you've beaten the game. So, like, there's a whole bunch of scenarios in video games that are just different than any other media out there. So you have to kind of think in terms of that. There's like tension level piece, like a tension level piece in video games, video game music 101. Like you want to be able to make a music composition that has 4 levels of tension so that the programmer or the sound designer or whatever can fade in and out as the battle gets more heated or the situation gets more frantic. The music does too. but it doesn't change in form. It just changes in intensity. So that's another thing that video games does that others don't really do. It's kind of a new animal. Video games have been around for a while, but it's still actually kind of a baby. And a lot of composers and sound designers are just now starting to figure out stuff. And now you have VR, and VR is a whole other animal. Doing music in VR is challenging. It's really challenging because we found out that bad audio, sound design, or music immediately takes you out of immersion in VR. So you have to be super, super careful about audio in VR, but more so than traditional video games, in my opinion, because the player in VR is completely immersed. So one of the first things that we ran into with music is if you do music in a stereo field in VR, it's actually kind of weird. Like if you're in a total open world and everything's around you, but the music's constantly going like this, it's really strange. So we had to rethink that. We had to like start doing music from source points and different areas and relate to the player's hearing differently than you normally would.
Yeah, no, that is a really interesting aspect that I think isn't intuitive or immediately obvious to people when they start to work in VR.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cool realization to have. Kyle Wynn is asking, how early into the process of a new game do you start work, and how do you avoid having to do a ton of work at the end?
We start immediately, and I really like the project designers who get music into the game as soon as possible. Tim does it he does it to a point. Lee loves doing that. Even if there's just white box, as soon as you put music in, it's a game. It feels alive. So a lot of the designers here, even if they don't have anything working, even if there isn't an animated character, they will put music in anyway. Because as soon as you have that, it feels like something is happening. So on their end, they're kind of eager to do that early. On my end, I'm eager to do it super early. Like Broken Age, I was looking at concept art like months before they were doing any kind of work in game. I wanted to know immediately, like, what's the idea of what this is going to be like, not necessarily what are all the animations going to be like, what's the game design like. That'll come. It's more like I just started talking to Tim and started looking at what Bagel was drawing before they even had anything up and running, and I just started designing off of that. There was a cutscene that Peter and I did in Broken Age. The animations weren't ready, and we actually had to work with an orchestra off of pictures, which
Nice.
can be done. It can be done, and it's totally nuts. But yeah, it's super important, especially with video games. I'm not convinced anybody's really actually made a proper video game production cycle, because I actually think they're still basing it off of movies, and that this is not movies, but it's just what people know right now. I think we're getting better at it, but video games have a ton of content, right? Tons and tons, hours and hours and hours of content. So as an audio person, you better be getting concept and ideas immediately, even before the game's signed. Just like start talking to people about what is this? Is it in space? Is it in the sewer? Is it in a car? Like just start wrapping your head around it as soon as possible. And the way I do that kinetically. So I'll go back to my room and I'll do some quick sound design and see if that sounds like what's in my head from what they describe. Like start there, start early.
And I think we'll wrap up with our last question here. Kyle Wynn asks as well, what is your workflow for working on a new sound?
Again, I don't have a singular template, but it will most likely be in Pro Tools. Pro Tools is my main DAW system, my main digital audio workstation. If it's an animal sound, or it's a vehicle, or it's some kind of situation, like I'll mostly just look at the concept art and think about it in my head about texture. Derek Brand has clay pot fighters in his new AF pitch kiln. I have yet to see them running around, but I have a pretty clear idea in my head what they actually sound like. And it's interesting because they're all in like earth crockware, like really thick pottery, but their bodies themselves are like diaphanous, right? So that's like counterintuitive. You have a really solid casing that's held up by like liquid gaseous spirit, right? So I had to really kind of wrap my head around what does that sound like. So I go into Pro Tools, I'll maybe bring in some synths, see if it's a synth-based sound. If it's not working right, then I'll bring in organic recordings of like animals or soundscapes or whatever, and then I'll start processing them and see if anything just hits my ear. I'll typically have a picture beside or a video, and as I work, I'll just keep looking at it. And if something connects and like I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, the relationship between that image and this sound, I'll keep that. I'll start like creating banks of stuff that to my ear that was really interesting with that image or that movement. That's typically what I do. Later on in development, when animation is very final and game design is very final, typically what I'll do is I'll bring in the animation file itself and I'll design to the animation by frame. I'll also, there's a lot of cutscene work, but cutscenes they're basically like designed to movies. Like it's literally a linear track, so that's a lot easier. But as design and animation get more and more nailed down, then my workflow will get more nailed down. Like at that point, I'll be like, okay, well, this is the Vacuum Pro synthesizer, and I'm mixing it with elephants, and I know where to go with this. But at the beginning, it's more about finding out, like, okay, what does this guy sound like when he walks around? And I'll just keep him beside me, and like I'll just keep looking at him and like try out different sounds. It's a really cool. I never got one of these. These are really cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, I think that wraps up the questions. Was there any other advice or any other bits of anecdotes that you wanted to share before we close off for today?
Yeah. Don't give up. Like if you want to be a pro audio person in video games, it's hard to get in. It's really hard to get in. I will say that there are super, super talented people out there. Like Chops are not the problem. Everybody I talk to who wants to work with me, I have no doubt that they know how to make great sounds. It usually gets down to personality, and it gets down to how far out of their comfort zone they can get comfortably, if that makes sense. Like if you're a sound designer and but you don't mind like dipping your toe into orchestral music, or you don't mind dipping your toe into coding and actually going into Maya files, into animation, and tacking something onto a spline or whatever. I mean, like any of those traits, any of those talents are super huge in video games. And like the more you can show that, the more attractive you are. Like audio programmers are worth their weight in gold, because I know several programmers who don't have a great feel for audio, and I know a ton of audio people who don't know anything about programmers. So if you have somebody who like can do both of those, like you're worth a lot, because then you get a lot of stuff done very, very quickly, and everybody's happy. And that's kind of the deal with video games. Like everybody's wearing a ton of hats. Like if you guys have seen anything in Double Fine and the documentaries, like everybody's constantly doing different stuff that's outside of their actual discipline. So I would say that it's so cliche, but I always say it, don't be a dick. And you'd be surprised how many people fail at that, coming in and at interviews or whatever, like their personality comes through and everybody's like, I don't want to work with that. So be a good person, just be a good person, like to have fun, like video games. Just don't be afraid to let your passion out, and let it hit us. That's what we love. That's what we look for. I guess in Amnesia Fortnite, don't like sleeping. None of us are sleeping. It's so funny. I'll walk around late at night tonight. Everybody's still here. Everybody's still cranking on these games. It's pretty funny.
I think that's always a risk that people fall into, or a trap that people can easily fall into. Hang on. Hang on, just letting the echo come back again.
Yeah.
No, it's meant to have automatic cancellation stuff. Well, there we go. It's happy now. But yeah, I often find in-game jams that people tend to neglect the amount of downtime or the amount of rest that they might need to a point where it affects their productivity late in the jam. And I think it's always a really important thing to pace yourself. And if you need sleep, get it early so that you can make better decisions later. Because when you're tired, it's hard to make good decisions.
It's a big deal that I'm personally fighting with. Like, my health has gone way south. I'm actually starting to build myself back up. I just did about 6 years straight of game dev, and like, I need a vacation. I need to get back on track. Like, that's a really big deal. You can't be productive if you're in bad health and everything is like super depressing because you can't get up in the morning, right? So balance is a really, really good thing to have, and it's definitely something that we look for because we could use it. We have so much stuff going on that if somebody comes in and he's like, hey, I got my stuff together, I'm willing to take this on, then that's really good news to us. We love that.
Yeah. We might call it a day there. I'm going to need you to click the button to end the stream when we're good. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I think we've had some great insights here, and I think you've been able to give some feedback that's going to be of great value to the people working on audio and music there.
I hope so. I'm really hoping that you guys got something out of this, because we love you guys, and I'm trying to check in as much as I can on like the community project and everything. I'm so slammed right now, but I gotta say, guys, like, the way you guys interact with us and the way that you give us support and say things, it's like, it means a lot. It means a lot to us, and we just love you. We really do.
I think it's interesting because it goes the other way as well, where people come along and they go, wow, here's a game studio who's allowing the community to be a part of something in this way, and that's really unusual. And I think it's very much an expression of passion on behalf of the people who are involved, that they're excited by the things that Double Fine do and inspired by the things that Double Fine do. I think that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, man, there's so much awful stuff going on in the world. Why not put some good energy into just making some great games that everybody enjoys? To me, that's worth it.
It's true. But yeah, thanks again for joining us. It's been great. And I'm sure we'll say hi and touch base later on in the event when things are a little bit more calm.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.